Well, staying with AUKUS, if the defence pact falls through or the US wants to change the dimensions of the agreement, it could have massive implications for our defence budget. I want to bring in Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Justin Bassi. Justin, welcome.
Thanks, Patricia. Great to be with you.
OK, just your initial response to this review, is it surprising?
I don't think it should be surprising, Patricia. I think the US has made it clear that they are looking at all of their alliances and all of their partners. I think the Under-Secretary for Defence, Bridge Colby, has made it very clear that he has been looking at AUKUS, of whether it aligns with US interests for some time. I think the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has been talking about defence spending and the need for Australia and other Indo-Pacific allies of the US to spend more. It is also shouldn't be surprising that such big initiatives are reviewed. The UK has just gone through this year a review of AUKUS led by Stephen Lovegrove. And also Australia has done a number of reviews as well, including an ongoing review by Dennis Richardson of the Submarine Agency. So I don't think people should be surprised by reviews, and I don't think they should be seen as fatalistic. But of course, the Trump administration doing a review shouldn't just be considered normal either. It will mean that Australia needs to be heavily involved, explaining why AUKUS is in US interest, and I'm sure we're doing that from both Canberra and with Ambassador Rudd in the US. But I think probably the viewers need to understand that if President Trump didn't like AUKUS, Patricia, he'd just cancel it. He's got out of Paris, didn't go through with the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There are a range of deals that President Trump doesn't like, he just gets out of. That hasn't been the case with AUKUS.
No, it hasn't been the case yet, right? So is it still a possibility?
I think AUKUS, particularly Pillar 1, which is the nuclear-propelled submarines, has shown good progress. I think that part of this review will be to look at what has worked, where is that progress, including in workforce, in trying to ensure there is a strengthening of collective capabilities, but also where there are weaknesses, that we know that the US administration is focused on within their own industrial base. We know that people like the Secretary of Defence and the Under-Secretary, Bridge Colby, are concerned about the US submarine industrial base. They want there to be the building of more submarines each year. We also know that the US is concerned about allies spending enough on their own defence. It's been crystal clear before this announcement of the review and also through the review that the US administration expects their allies to show a commitment to their own national security. And I think it is important to set out that, in my view, AUKUS is a prime example for Australia to be able to say that we are committed to our own national security. The problem, I think, is beyond AUKUS, Patricia. I think there is going to be a need for Australia to show that we are not just saying that our defence strategy is only focused on AUKUS. OK,
that's an interesting point, and you have been already arguing that we should be spending more on defence, so that's very much on the record. So help me with this, because senior Pentagon official Bridge Colby that you mentioned is conducting this AUKUS review, and he's been pushing US allies across the world to lift defence spending. Should we be prepared to tip more money in that meeting potentially with Donald Trump on Monday? Is that how soon that should be offered? And should it be about AUKUS? Should we really be spending, even by your summation that we need to be spending more, should we be putting that more into AUKUS or into alternative defence strategies?
In my view, Patricia, I think there is a very strong argument, particularly with Pillar 1, the submarines, to say that Australia and the UK, remembering this is not just a bilateral agreement, it's a trilateral, that there is very good progress with Pillar 1 that is not just in Australia's interest but the US interest. I think that's key. But I do think that it's very relevant that we have had, yes, I've been on the record, as have my colleagues at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, to say that Australia should lift defence spending, bring forward the increase in spending that is set for 2033-34 for it to be far sooner. But that is largely beyond AUKUS.
That's why I'm interested, sorry to interrupt, but no doubt the US might want to see us spending more on this AUKUS deal. I just want to get from you, do you think we're spending enough now on the AUKUS deal and we should be quite hard line about that and perhaps look at other spending?
I think it's incumbent, Patricia, for Australia not just to deal with AUKUS as a spending issue, but as a collective capability. So we need to ensure that the reasons that the US entered into the AUKUS arrangement to begin with are reiterated. Of course, the only reason that AUKUS was entered into was a collective concern about China's military and technological capability. I think too often people ask, why did Australia want AUKUS and what is Australia getting from AUKUS? The more important question is, why did the US agree to AUKUS? And it wasn't simply because Australia was a great ally and traditional partner. It was because it was in the US interest. I think that's clear. So it's not just about spending. I think Pillar 2, which is the technological, advanced capability component of AUKUS, I think we do need to be looking at that. I don't believe the review will be solely related to the Pillar 1 submarines. There will have to be a good look at the advanced capabilities, and that's an area where I do think the three governments need to put in more money, yes, but I do think that where Australia faces a vulnerability is in the fact that we are only at 2.02% of GDP spend on defence. The next financial year will be 2.05%. As all other countries, both in the region and through Europe and our AUKUS partner, the UK, are already officially setting the target of 3% and more. That involves, for the UK and Australia, spending more on non-AUKUS related capabilities. That's what we're going to have to do, not because the US is telling us to do so, but because it is in our interests, with the world effectively having multiple fires in Europe, the Middle East, and increased tension here in the Indo-Pacific. If
the Prime Minister is able to get this meeting with Donald Trump, should he be going into that meeting with some kind of commitment, in your view, for a higher spending on defence?
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles met with Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth at Singapore last week, and DPM Marles said that Australia was up for the conversation on increased defence spending. That is the message, I believe, that the Prime Minister should be providing to the President. There doesn't necessarily have to be a specific commitment on an individual capability, but he needs to be up for the conversation, and he needs to be explaining to the President that it's not because the US is demanding or asking, it is because it is actually with the deteriorating strategic circumstances in Australia's national interests. And at the same time, I don't think we need to be defensive about this AUKUS review. The Prime Minister should be seeking to have the meeting to explain to the President that AUKUS is actually in the US interests as much as it is in Australia's.
OK, but you think that our Prime Minister should go into that meeting potentially on Monday, as I say, it's not secured yet, but to say we are prepared to spend more than what we've already committed?
Yes, I think the strategic review, the National Defence Strategy that Australia did and issued last year, the Defence Strategic Review of 2023, set out that Australia should increase defence spending due to deteriorating strategic circumstances. The strategic circumstances have only further deteriorated, and so therefore it is in our interest to spend more on defence. The Prime Minister should be willing to say that he's up for that conversation, to work out where and how to spend more money on those necessary capabilities.
And do you believe this review that we've seen today is linked to the Prime Minister saying that he doesn't want to follow that suggestion, that it's essentially retaliation?
I'm not convinced that's the case, Patricia. From what Deputy Prime Minister Marles said, he seems to have been advised some time ago that the review is coming. It may have been in his face-to-face meeting with Secretary Hegseth in Singapore. So my instinct is that the review was set before this. I think it has been public that people in the administration, like Under Secretary Colby, have been interested in reviewing AUKUS for some time. So I don't think that's it, but I do think that the Americans probably were surprised by, at times, the dismissive reaction or response to the request from the Americans for Australia and other allies to increase our defence spending.
So you think our Prime Minister, in his public comments, has been too dismissive?
I think that the way that Deputy Prime Minister Miles explained that the government was up for a conversation on increased defence spending was the exact right response. I think it is also right for the Prime Minister to say that it is going to be an Australian sovereign decision of where and how we spend our money, including in defence, of course.
But you think he was too dismissive, though? Is that what you're saying?
I think the Prime Minister could have taken the language that the Deputy Prime Minister took, whether it was in response to ASPI's call for increased defence or the US calls for increased defence, to say that, well, of course, it's in the Australian government's purview. It's the Australian government that will make that decision. And we won't make it because either a think tank or another country is telling us to, but it is a very reasonable conversation to have, and that because the strategic circumstances are so bad, there are wars around the world, and unfortunately there is increased tension in our region, that unfortunately there is a conversation that needs to be had around increased defence spending, yes. Just
a final question on Iran. The New York Times is reporting that Israel appears to be preparing to launch an attack soon on Iran, quoting officials in the United States and Europe. How concerning is that prospect?
Well, I think it shows that the Middle East is completely unstable. I think it is also important, though, to recognise that we are in all likelihood dealing with a three-way battle around the negotiations for a renewed or new nuclear deal that the US is engaged with Iran. I think it's likely a lot of signalling, Israel signalling to the US that they don't want the US to enable or allow the flexibility for Tehran to head towards acquiring a nuclear bomb. It is probably signalling that is seen as useful by the Americans to say to Tehran, you better come to the negotiating table and do a proper deal, otherwise Israel, that does have the capability to hurt you, will. I think the issue that escalated with Iran coming out with a more official statement that said that if there was conflict that they would specifically target US personnel in regional bases, that then means that the US has no choice but to take action and to, as they say, move non-essential personnel out of those bases. But I think there is a lot of signalling. I think the key here, Patricia, is that this is not just an Israel-Iran issue in relation to Iran potentially acquiring a nuclear bomb. Iran is not a stable regime. They are in control of, they sponsor, they direct terrorist organisations. And if Iran were to acquire a nuclear bomb, we should all be concerned that the terrorist proxies would be that much closer themselves.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.